to talk more about the details we've gotten out of the Gene Hackman death. And just before we lost your audio, I believe we've got you back. You know, Hackman had been dealing with Alzheimer's, and I think some people might look at this and say, well, if his wife had been dead for a week, why did he not call 911 or report his wife's death to anyone? Can you just bring us in the dynamics of what would have been happening for someone dealing with Alzheimer's during this particular episode?
Sure. So, from what the medical examiner is reporting, he had really advanced Alzheimer's, and patients in that type of situation, they really often lose awareness of their environment. They lose what we call executive function, which means that they're not able to make routine judgments about their self-care, their safety. It sounds like he was really dependent on his wife. And so sadly, when she expired, he essentially was helpless at home. I think it raises systemic questions about his overall care. Someone that impaired should not really be dependent on just one caregiver. So it raises questions of why were there not other caregivers that were coming to the home to assist his wife, to check in on them both? She was already in her 60s, and she herself would have been in a more immunocompromised situation. So I think they were living in a quite vulnerable state, being so isolated on that estate.
And look, for his wife, Betsy, the CDC, according to the CDC, hantavirus pulmonary syndrome symptoms could be mistaken for the flu or other respiratory diseases. I mean, how likely is it that she had no idea the severity of her illness, as she likely functioned as a caretaker in large part for her husband?
Yeah, and I think that's what makes this case so tragic, is that the symptoms probably came on insidiously, but then very quickly. So before she really realized what was going on, she was essentially disabled in terms of being able to reach out for help. And again, I think that raises the question about their overall isolation. Also, they're living in a place where neighbors are not able to easily access them. Were there family members that were instructed to check in on them regularly? I think when you have an elderly couple living so isolated, you would want people calling in and checking in on them at least every couple of days. And if they're not able to reach them, to then be able to immediately call for help. So I think that it sounds like Gene Hackman was isolated and helpless for about a week before he finally expired. So I think that was a tragic aspect of this case.
And you touched on it a little bit, sort of the importance of having a network of caretaking as opposed to just one person in particular. How much of a difference do you think that would have made I mean, this is already a tragic case, but how much of a difference would a network of care, do you believe, would have made in a situation like this?
I think it would have made a big difference. Look, I think that Mr. Hackman, was quite elderly. He was 95 and he had advanced Alzheimer's. To me, the more tragic aspect here is actually Betsy. That I think that she was taking on too much to be the sole caregiver when she herself was entering late life. And I think if she had had a support network around her and they hadn't been so isolated, perhaps she would have been taken to the hospital and given supportive care much sooner, and perhaps she would have survived the hantavirus. And by the same token, if they had had a network of care, he wouldn't have been left alone that last week of his life, and perhaps he would also still be alive. So I think that they were living in a very vulnerable overall living situation, and that unfortunately the hantavirus really upended all of their expectations.
A lot of tragic details still coming out about this case. Dr. Ziv Cohen, really appreciate you being here. Thanks for the time and perspective.
Good to be here.
All right, we're also following fires that